Hey there, Scott Tipton here from Blastoff Comics. You know, one of the things we have become known for since we opened our doors are our creative collections. In the last few years, we've helped creators like Mark Waid, Carl Kessel, Harlan Ellison, and Jim Kruger sell their collections, putting some rare comics with a really unique pedigree in the hands of collectors around the world. Which is why we're so pleased to announce the acquisition of the Tad Stones collection. Now, Tad Stones is a name you might not be familiar with, but you most definitely know his work. Over his long career at Disney, working as a writer, producer, animator, and Imagineer, Tad worked on such films as The Fox and the Hound and The Rescuers. He helped develop projects for Epcot Center, and he produced animated series such as the Chip 'n Dale's Rescue Rangers, Aladdin, Buzz Lightyear, but the show he's most known for is the show he wrote, created, and directed, Darkwing Duck. Recently, Judd had Tad here in the shop to talk about his comic collection, how comics affected his work, and his long career in the animation business. It's a great inside look at the animation world from an insider's perspective. I think you'll enjoy it. Check it out.
And without further ado, we'd like to welcome Tad Stones here in our store. Thank you for joining us here today.
Hey, happy to be here.
So the thing that I really like to do when I'm talking to creators is sort of start off by asking, what was your first comic that you remember reading? And I don't remember, like say, just remember reading, but also that stuck with you enough that you say, I know that cover, I know that interior.
Man, I'd have a hard time saying it. It was a different world back then in prehistory.
Meaning what?
Well, the comics were everywhere. It wasn't just that there were no comic shops and you had to buy them off spinner racks. Comics were just part of life. You used to get haircuts way more often than we do now. You know, every 2 or 3 weeks go in because don't want to be shaggy. And at the barbershop would be a stack of comics, you know, that would slowly rotate and they'd be dog-eared. They'd be there, you go to the supermarket, there's comics along with the other magazines, you know. So in addition to spinner racks, you'd find them in doctor's office, dentist's office. They were just around,
yeah.
And that's how I soaked them up. You know, my hamburger I grew up with is, you know, Bob's a Big Boy in Toluca Lake. And, you know, they used to put out a comic. And that was, you know, one of my first ones. But I started with I'm sure some Mighty Mouse or probably some Dell comics. But because of that barbershop thing, superhero comics were right there. I mean, it was some of the craziest times of the Silver Age, you know, Batman versus aliens as opposed to the gritty streets. Sure. So it's hard for me to pick out a memory of any specific comic. My one specific memory that I point to that changed my relationship with comics was I was probably 11 or 12. About the time, at least back then, you kind of move out of comics and maybe into science fiction or just into something else.
Right.
My family went on a vacation to Lake Tahoe, and we were camping with our cousins, and there was a general store there, and they had a spinner rack. So I go down there, and there were some superheroes that I'd never seen before, and they all had little boxes in the corner. And my first Marvel comic with the little Marvel box was Tales of Suspense 47, I think it was, Iron Man versus the Melter. And I mainly picked it up because, wow, there's a cool superhero thing. It's a cool cover, and I just didn't know about him.
If I'm not mistaken, we have that on the wall here somewhere. All of these books on the wall are all from Tad's collection. This is a very, very small selection of what he has. It's pretty vast. Of course, all of that will be available for sale on the website and in our store. But we put a selection here, and I think we have it on the wall somewhere. There's so many here that, here we go, it's right below.
Okay.
Here it is.
There it is. Cool, dynamic cover. It was just, I mean, and it, you know, you're used to comics, so this ridiculous costume, you know, didn't faze me at all.
But you say the thing in the corner,
this was
DC Comics.
That was something different, and what that did, I read this, and I couldn't put my finger on it, but there was something different about it. The story was different. It was told in a different way, and you know, now we go, well, duh. Now they paid more attention to making their characters more individual,
right.
You know, not so iconic that they had problems and whatnot. This guy was actually Tony Stark, who had shrapnel in his heart, and these magnets were keeping it from killing him. I went back to the store, and I picked up every comic that had that Marvel box in the corner.
And it was Marvel Mania.
And in the next 2 weeks, as we kind of drove around Lake Tahoe, everywhere, and you're talking gambling casinos, you know, I wasn't allowed to go on the casino floor, but they'd have a little gift shop with magazines, and there were comics there. And I picked up like Fantastic Four 23, that's about it, and Spider-Man #5, and Tales to Astonish 49, the first Giant Man issue. Now, I didn't know who Ant-Man was, but it's like, and now this guy's big, you know. It was just, and of course, you know, you talk about Marvel Mania. I went back home to my neighborhood and showed all my friends.
Yeah.
And they all started collecting Marvel comics. And we all, you know, back then, comics were 12 cents.
This was the old viral Facebook back then.
Yes,
you went and told your friends,
people,
and they told their friends.
And we kind of divide them up and say, okay, you buy these comics, and I'll buy these comics, and let us, you know, so we didn't have to spend all of, what, $5 a month to get all the comics that you needed from Marvel. But there was an excitement there, and of course Stan Lee was, you know, laying it on heavy with, you know, that was before the soapbox, but still there's that sense of, you know, hey, no, I'm talking to you.
Right.
You know,
and yet, if this be doomsday,
yeah,
you know,
and it's like
Shakespearean.
Yeah, and that I'm sure that company, you know, flourished without the internet,
right,
you know,
right.
because people were just had to talk to each other and debate about things, and it was a lot of fun. I mean, collecting was a whole different experience, and it was
I certainly remember, you know, going to a spinner rack in a drugstore and finding an Avengers comic and being shocked that Captain America was in space. You know, he had the helmet on him, he's throwing his shield, and thinking this is crazy, and it was a multi-part storyline. And I kept going back every single week, and I remember saying to the guy there, hey, you know, when are you going to get the second part of this story, because I need to find out what happened. And I kept asking him, and one day he just went, kid, I don't know what you're talking about. I get some comics, I put them on the rack, you know, like, and I realized, okay, this is the beginning of the hunt. Mm-hmm. This is what it is. So I'm going to know how do I do that?
The hunt was everything, and no, I'm sure you're not going to give this kind of deal to people walking the store. But
whatever it is you're.
I don't think. Oh, definitely, because I think the most I ever paid for a comic was $5 and some trade-in, or excuse me, $5 for Fantastic Four #5. Now, to get that, I got totally ripped off, because you know, you're hunting for comics and you would find them in used bookstores for a nickel. That's how you got your comics. And you'd be going through your yellow pages, look for other used bookstores nearby, because every used bookstore had like this box of comics. Well, back then was just the professional collector was starting. And you know, some articles surfacing like Time magazine about, well, for Superman is worth $300, or you know, whatever it was.
$300?
Yeah, exactly. That's insane. We had a neighbor who was probably in his early 30s, and he had 3 stacks of comics. So I bought these 3 stacks of comics, and each stack was like this, just tied up with string, I think for $30. And it was mostly, unfortunately, he wasn't a big superhero fan as far as I was concerned. It was mostly like cowboys, early Disney, and some superheroes. And those seemed to be the valuable things. So I bundled up those superhero comics, and I think there were some Captain Marvels in there, some Wonder Woman, and then a lot of things that, you know, these superheroes did not survive. They were just strange things trying to cash in on the craze then. But I bundled them all up, and I took it down to the store in Hollywood, you know, with like, oh, I got Golden Age comics, I'll sell them, and then I'll be able to buy tons of comics. And it was one of those things I will never forget, where I had a list, and he goes, well, you know, I'd have to see what condition they're at. So my mom's in the car outside. I go out, get the comics in, and I hand them to him. And he looked at them. He said, "Oh yeah, there's some stuff here." And he took the pile and he turned it behind him.
Oh no, no!
And then he ended up saying, "So yeah, I will give you like X amount of trade-in." And the one comic I really wanted was Fantastic Four #5 because I think it completed a set or something. I'm sure it did. And that was like $5. But then I had this other trade-in thing, and I got, this is before action figures, before anything, and there was just, he had a guy who made vacuum-formed like hero models, but they were just, this guy, it didn't matter who you were, it was the same model. It's kind of like vinyl, Hong Kong toys now, where it all looks like Mickey Mouse, but you paint anything you want on it. He did that with superheroes, and I picked Goliath because it actually fit his costume, looked okay, not a special character to me. I have no idea what happened to that. But that guy got a bunch of golden age goodness, and
now,
I got Fantastic Four #5, and then of course going, "Oh no, Mom, this was a great deal,"
Having said that, Fantastic Four #5 is worth a pretty penny now. You happen to
That
have
is
it in
true.
your collection, but I don't know if it's the same one from.
Oh, it would be the same thing.
There you go. Now,
I mean,
a lot of
my whole
comics-
collection it wasn't like I got rid of it and then, I have to recapture my youth. No,
Yeah.
those are the comics, they're in, reading collection or fair collection, some good, I'm hoping.
It's the Tadstone's
Yeah.
pedigree.
Exactly.
I thought you'd be a pedigree, did you?
Yeah. No, it was so much fun. I wanted to be an artist. My dad had wanted to be a cartoonist. He ended up
Before or
not
after
going
the
with that.
comics part of it? Did you pick up comics and go, I think I want to
No,
do
no,
that?
I wanted to be an artist of some sort. My dad wanted to be a cartoonist. When he went to USC, he was actually on the newspaper, and he put out like an editorial cartoon every day. Unfortunately, that would be great practice to draw a finished thing, a finished gag every day, but back then he actually had to carve a linoleum block. So it wasn't like he got to work on his ink line or his style.
We did it on marble, kid.
Wow. Yeah, he didn't quite have to chisel, but he was carving. But when he got out of college, it was basically a depression, so he took any job that he could. He wanted to do comic strips, and then one job led to another, and then he had a long career at the Carnation Company, which had affiliation with Disneyland, which got me to Disneyland once a year at least, which, who knew that would happen.
Who knew you'd become an Imagineer?
But because he wanted to be a cartoonist, he had, the best thing he had was the famous famous cartoonist corps. And this was Milton Caniff, Al Capp, Rube Goldberg, all these great guys with what was originally a mail order lesson, talking about how they did their work. There were general lessons, and then there were biographies and how they, and that was back, they'd say, if you write a polite letter to an artist, he'll actually, he may send you a comic strip. Now, those are the days when there were comic strips. Anyway, I was soaking up all that. I just loved that. So I always wanted to be that. Those early trips in Disneyland, I got the Bob Thomas book of the Art of Animation, which was basically centered around Sleeping Beauty.
And how old were you at this point?
Well, that would be before the Marvel Comics stuff.
Yeah,
so
yeah.
I was, in the single digits, I would guess.
Right.
And John Nagy was the artist on TV, and there've been many artists like this where it's like, and this is how you draw a pumpkin, and you're down on the floor trying to catch up with them, and then the commercials, you're shading and all that.
There's no pausing.
And then he would frame it at the end, and that was it. And he put out art sets, and we had those. Again, my dad encouraged me. There was nothing in my family saying, art, how do you make a living with that? There was none of that, because that's what he wanted to do. And perhaps as much of an influence as those art books were, my dad was in basically the marketing side of the company, and they would put out promotions like an Indian headdress if you sell 4 cases of Friskies or, you know, whatever it was, you know, things to the retailers. So they'd always have stationery, you know, with the logo of the promotion on that, on really nice bond paper. And once that promotion was over, they had reams and reams of that paper that they had nothing to do with. My dad brought them home. You know, that was fantastic drawing paper. I mean, it really spoiled me that I always had drawing paper to use. And in fact, I compared notes. When I started at Disney, I shared an office with Ron Clements, who went on to do, you know, well, rework the history of animation, Little Mermaid and Aladdin, and
which you then
brought to TV,
television versions of.
But Ron used to say, "Oh yeah, I drew on paper bags," and then his mom, every once in a while, as a special treat, would buy a little packet of typing paper, and he'd, you know, use every bit of it and turn it over and do that. And Ron was actually went into directing early on, but he was actually a fantastic animator. And before that, he submitted to Mad Magazine, and he did these beautiful Mort Drucker-like caricatures. And I was amazed. The thing, you know, when I'm all over the place here, but I was lucky to grow up. I was the art kid. You know, it's like, oh yeah, he's pretty good. And you go to school and, oh wow, look what he's doing. You know, you feel like, yeah, I'm doing okay. You know, and you go to a place like Disney, and it's like all those people, you know, were that good. And a lot of them went to art school, which I hadn't. And I remember visiting Ron in his apartment, seeing these Mort Drucker things. It's like, oh, okay, I'm the worst one in the studio. You know, just because his artwork was just so fantastic.
All of your success, you never went to art school, or did you?
No, when I went to Loyola University in Los Angeles. I was an art major, and my English teachers all wanted me to switch to English because of my writing. In fact, my favorite story was English Composition 101. We were asked to describe something in 3 different stages. And to make it interesting for myself, I basically wrote it as if I was, in my head, a black cat going up to a haunted house. So I described it as an empty house, and then the ghost showed up, and then in the morning they went away, and when the ghost showed up, the furniture was all nice again. And it was just this thing I wrote down, and got the paper back, I got a C at the top instead of a grade. So I'm walking with this Jesuit back to his office, and he starts talking to me about, you know, writing and all that, and he says, you know...
Did you ever think about making it a duck?
No. Quite the opposite. Quite the opposite. He started talking about plagiarism. And suddenly, it got through my skull. I went, wait, and I literally stopped. I said, you think I copied this? And that he was taken aback because I obviously was going, cool! He thought it was so good that it was professional and I stole it. That's it. You know, I should have then said, well, what were you basing that on? Where's your references and all that? But I think it was that thing where he was totally taken aback because he didn't, I guess he really thought I stole it from somewhere. He didn't want to back down completely, so he gave me a C saying that
it's too good.
No, he was saying that, well, that wasn't the assignment. You know, obviously, you were supposed to describe something in real life, and you obviously weren't at this house. And I said, no, I wasn't a cat either. So the next assignment was another description. He said, show something in 2 states. And I said, to make sure, does it have to be something I've seen, or is it fictional, like a horse in a corral and a horse in a corral in the rain? He said, it can be fictional. And so I wrote about a T-Rex crashing through the jungle, and then and this obviously doesn't quite make sense in real life, but a T-Rex dying in the snow, the Ice Age, and his head crashing down, and his eye changing color from yellow to blue. But I later found out when I went to Walt Disney Studios, and we had access to all the old films, this was way before tape, I was half remembering Fantasia. where the dinosaurs, there's this, obviously the T-Rex is a big thing in Fantasia, but then there's a Stegosaurus who dies in the desert. His head slams down and his eye turns color. And that was the little half-remembered memory, I don't know when the re-release of Fantasia was, when I was a kid, sometime in the 50s, that was just in the back of my head. So again, that Disney influence was there. And then when I finally did a Disney, all those kinds of influences, half-remembered things, turned into episodes of my shows.
Come back next time for the second part of our talk with Tad Stones, where we talk about his long career at Disney. And make sure to check out blastoffcomics.com or our North Hollywood location for a look at some of the books from the Tad Stones collection. Thanks for watching.